Karen screamed as a 1,000-pound Angus bull named Sheriff charged directly at her prized white golf cart, its horns lowered in dirt flying with every thundering hoofbeat. Her sun hat flew off, her iced tea splattered across her lap, and her screams echoed through the entire HOA block. But this wasn't some random farm accident. No, Karen had been warned repeatedly, and yet she had once again parked her cart directly in front of my barn doors, smug as ever, muttering something about how shade is public property. What she didn't know, what made this whole moment so satisfyingly poetic, was that Sheriff wasn't just a bull, he was the enforcer I never knew I needed. And today justice wore horns and hooves. It all started with Karen's obsession with shortcuts. My farm bordered the edge of our community, which was managed by one of the most overbearing HOAs known to mankind. Our land was private, distinctly marked, and had been in my family for generations. But ever since that fancy neighborhood development popped up 10 years ago, certain entitled residents had started acting like our property was their personal convenience. Karen was the ringleader. Her routine involved zipping through my back field in her golf cart to shave off a minute or two from her drive to the clubhouse. Never mind the posted signs, the closed gate, or the livestock moving through. Karen had decided my land was her path, and no law or logic was going to stop her. At first it was mildly annoying. She'd roll through and wave like she owned the place, shouting things like, "Morning, farmer," as she kicked up dust past our hay bales. I tried to reason with her. I even installed a small wooden gate at the end of the field with a polite sign that said, "Private property, please use main road." Within a day, Karen had broken the latch and driven right through it, replacing my sign with her own laminated notice that read, "Shared community access authorized by HOA." It was laughably fake, but that's the kind of delusion we were dealing with then. She started parking in front of the barn, not just once or twice every single morning, like it was her own designated space. She'd pull up, leave her cart in the exact spot where we load hay, and vanish for hours. Sometimes she was off gossiping near the pickleball courts, other times she'd be sunbathing on the cart roof with her dog in her lap and a glass of sweet tea on the hood. No matter what, she refused to move. When we needed to access the barn one morning, my cousin Nate came to deliver a veterinary kit for one of our hears, and he had to lift it over Karen's cart like it was a damn mountain pass. When I approached her that day, she smiled and said, "Oh, relax, I'm just here for a bit. The sun hits just right on this angle. It's practically a community patio." That's when I realized this wasn't ignorance. This was entitlement soaked in sunscreen. I contacted the HOA and explained the situation. Their response, "We'll look into it," which in HOA language means we'll do absolutely nothing unless Karen complains about you first. That weekend, she escalated. Not content with blocking access, she hosted what she called a barnside brunch with 3 of her friends, complete with folding chairs, cupcakes, and a Bluetooth speaker blaring Kenny G. They sat there laughing and clinking glasses while my ranch hands stood to the side holding feed buckets, waiting like it was a red carpet event. That evening, I sat at my porch table fuming. Sheriff, our largest bull, grazed near the fence line. He was muscular, short-tempered, and strangely majestic. He had been penned in the barn all week due to pasture rotation, and he was growing antsy. Sheriff was protective of his space, didn't like strange objects near his area, and had a particular hatred for reflective surfaces and Karen's golf cart chrome mirrors, bright white paint, and a fake chrome hood ornament shaped like an eagle. To Sheriff, it probably looked like a rival male trying to claim his barn. I started wondering what would happen if Karen, in her usual pattern, blocked the barn again, and what if, instead of me arguing or making another complaint, I just opened the gate, just opened it, and let Sheriff be Sheriff. I'm not a cruel man. I would never intentionally cause harm, but I also believe in natural consequences, and in this case, the natural consequence of parking in front of a bull barn is that you might meet a bull. So I waited 2 mornings passed without incident. Karen must have been busy, or maybe the HOA had finally done something. But on the 3rd day, I heard the familiar electric whine of her cart outside. I stepped into the barn and peered through the cracks in the wooden door. There she was, hat on, sunglasses shining, drink in hand, golf cart parked directly across both barn doors. Again, she turned up the volume on her speaker and reclined her seat like it was a beach chair. I could hear her humming over the music, completely oblivious to the fact that her metal chariot was less than 15 feet from a bull itching for movement. I gave it 5 minutes just to be sure, then calmly and silently I unlatched the latch, clicked with a Quiet finality, and the old barn door creaked open just enough for Sheriff to take notice. He stood at the edge of his pen, massive and muscular, his coat slick black and glinting in the morning sun. His ears twitched and his nostrils flared as he caught the scent of fresh air and something unfamiliar: rubber tires, iced tea, cheap perfume, and arrogance. Sheriff had been cooped up too long, rotating through a confined grazing pattern due to pasture work, and his mood had soured over the last few days. He needed space, he needed freedom, and now, thanks to Karen, he had a perfect target to focus his pent-up energy. I stayed just inside, crouched by the feed bins, watching silently. It was surreal how peaceful everything looked outside. Birds chirped lazily. Karen was sipping her drink, scrolling her phone, humming some tune, and occasionally giggling to herself as if this were her private spa retreat. Her cart was angled perfectly in front of both barn doors, like a blockade built by someone too lazy to care and too entitled to think anyone else's needs mattered. She had no idea that 15 ft away, a ticking time bomb with horns was about to be released. Sheriff took a slow step forward, then another. The barn's inner gate swung fully open, and his heavy hooves made a dull thud on the packed dirt floor. He paused at the edge, his huge frame casting a long shadow across the entrance. Karen was still oblivious. Then he stepped outside. The sunlight hit him square, and the moment his eyes locked on the golf cart, he froze, his head tilted slightly, his muscles tensed. He let out one deep earth rumbling snort. Karen finally noticed the noise and turned around slowly. When she saw the bull, she laughed at first. Laughed like it was some novelty pet wandering loose. "Well, hello there, Moo," she said, waving her hand lazily as if greeting a neighbor's golden retriever. "You lost or something?" she added. Chuckling, Sheriff didn't move. He stood his ground, lowering his head ever so slightly, a sure sign he was assessing a potential threat. I kept my position, heart pounding, though a small part of me found the whole thing borderline comedic. Karen had no clue what she was inviting into her life. This wasn't some cartoon cow. This was a 1,500 pounds alpha bull bred for strength and instinct. He wasn't going to attack her, of course, unless provoked, but he wasn't about to let that shiny cart sit in his space like a taunt either. Karen leaned out of the cart and tapped her phone to start recording. "Look at this beast, just waltzing out of a barn, no leash, no fence, typical farm safety around here. Just wait till HOA sees this." She panned her camera over to Sheriff, who chose that moment to snort again and scraped the dirt with one hoof. Her voice wavered. "Okay, maybe you should go back inside now, buddy." But Sheriff didn't go back. He began to move forward, slow and deliberate, as if testing the air. His gaze didn't leave the cart. That chrome ornament must have glinted just wrong, because suddenly, with zero warning, Sheriff bellowed a roar that shook the barn walls and charged forward, massive frame barreling toward the cart like a missile wrapped in muscle. Karen screamed so loud it startled the nearby horses. She tried turning the key in her ignition, but the old battery wheezed and failed. The cart didn't move. She pushed, fumbled, kicked the dashboard, even tried honking, but it was useless. The cart was dead. She bolted out of it in sandals, tripping over her purse strap, and ran to the nearest oak tree, hiding behind it like it offered some kind of magical protection from livestock. Sheriff, to his credit, didn't gore the cart. He did something much more satisfying. He slammed his massive head into the front bumper, snapping the flimsy plastic with ease and flipping the drink cup through the air. The iced tea landed with a perfect splash across Karen's folding chair, and the Bluetooth speaker bounced to the ground with a crunch. Then Sheriff snorted again and stood proudly beside his conquest, staring at the broken vehicle like a gladiator awaiting applause. Karen peeked out from behind the tree, face pale, lips trembling. "Call someone, call animal control, that thing is wild," she shrieked. Her words were incoherent and frantic. "He attacked me," she screamed, though she hadn't been touched. "He's out of control." I finally stepped out, hands in my pockets, trying to hold back the grin on my face. "Karen, you all right?" I asked casually, glancing at the destroyed cart. "Didn't expect company so early. You let that beast out on purpose? You're insane. That thing could have killed me." I shrugged. Barn doors were blocked. I had to let Sheriff out for his exercise. "You've seen the signs. This is private livestock property." She stomped toward me now, barefoot, with one sandal lost during her sprint. "I'm reporting you. This was deliberate endangerment. My cart is destroyed. You'll be paying for this. Actually, Karen, you'll be paying me for repeated trespassing, blocking a working barn, interfering with agricultural operations. I've got footage of every Time you parked here, every time you ignored the signs, including this morning. She froze mid-sentence. You have cameras several and audio, we record everything. Near the barn, it's a safety thing, sheriff's not the only one we keep in. Eye on Karen's face went a strange shade of red. She stormed back to her cart. Tried starting it again, no luck. With nothing left to do, she waddled off toward the HOA block, clutching her purse like a shield and muttering curses under her breath. Later that afternoon, I reviewed the footage and backed it up in 3 places. I knew Karen wouldn't stop there. Sure enough, by sundown I got a knock on my door. 2 men in golf shirts and khakis stood with clipboards, the unmistakable uniform of the HOA board. Sir, we received a complaint about a dangerous animal loose on your property. One began stiffly, and we've been informed that you may be in violation of community safety protocols. Added the other. Which community? I asked. They hesitated. The Pine Brook Estates HOA. That's funny, I said, walking them around the side of the barn. Because this land isn't part of your HOA. It never has been. I've got the property deeds and county lines framed in my office, but if you'd like to see something else, take a look at this. I showed them the footage of Karen blocking the barn, being warned, ignoring the signs, and ultimately fleeing from Sheriff. Their expressions shifted. One muttered, "Oh boy." The other rubbed his forehead. This isn't going to look good on the board. They left without another word that night. Sheriff lay content under the stars, a quiet king surveying his pasture. The cart still sat where he'd left it, bent, broken, and covered in hoof prints, and for the first time in weeks no one drove through my field. No brunches, no laminated signs, no Kenny G, just peace. But deep down I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her never are. She was cooking up something, and whatever it was, I was already planning my next move, because if she wanted a war over barn space, she just learned the first lesson: don't pick fights with a man who owns a bull and knows how to open a gate. It didn't take long. By the following morning, Karen was back, though this time not in her broken golf cart. She showed up on foot, storming across my pasture like a general leading an invisible army, arms flailing, with a manila folder in hand and 2 HOA board members trailing behind her like confused ducklings. One of them was the HOA president, a gay-haired man named Curtis, who looked perpetually exhausted and vaguely apologetic. The other was Angela, the treasurer, who always wore sunglasses too large for her face and carried herself with the importance of someone in charge of absolutely nothing. Karen marched straight up to my fence. I stayed leaning against the post, arms crossed, chewing a piece of straw I'd picked up just for the occasion. Sheriff was grazing lazily in the background, occasionally glancing over like he could sense the tension. I didn't say anything right away. I just waited for her voice to run out of steam. It took longer than expected. Karen wasn't just mad, she was on a mission. She claimed the entire barn was a hazard, that I had unleashed livestock in a residential proximity zone, that I'd endangered the public, and that she had every right to access the path behind my barn based on community easement laws, which she read aloud from a printout she'd made herself. Curtis stepped forward to try and de-escalate, saying maybe we could find a middle ground and that perhaps I could build a bypass trail for residents. I stared at him like he'd suggested I rename my barn Karen's Spa and Lounge. Angela pulled out her phone and started recording me muttering something about documenting aggressive landowner behavior. I held up my hand and asked politely if any of them would like to see the property lines drawn on the county website or the surveillance footage showing Karen parking her cart like a blockade. Curtis declined. Angela didn't even look up. Karen launched into another rant about how farm people have no understanding of modern civility and how this entire situation was why HOAs were invented in the first place. At that point, I was done being nice. I told them in no uncertain terms that this land was not part of their HOA, had never been under their jurisdiction, and was governed by county agricultural laws, which they were clearly unfamiliar with. I also informed them that I had already contacted the sheriff's department and that my lawyer, who specialized in property disputes, had advised me to document every interaction moving forward. Karen scoffed and said something about internet lawyers, but her voice faltered when I added that the actual Sheriff Bill Chambers was a family friend who'd grown up on this land and who already had a copy of the surveillance tape that got their attention. Curtis mumbled an apology and said they'd review the situation. Internally, Angela stopped recording and looked suddenly very interested in her shoes. Karen, however, doubled down. She Yelled that this wasn't over, that she'd sue me for property damage and emotional distress, and that I'd regret letting that murderous animal out of its cage. Then she turned and stomped away, dragging her folder behind her like a broken kite. I figured that would buy me at least a few days of peace, but Karen worked faster than I expected. 2 days later, I received a court summons. Small claims court. Karen had filed a case against me for the destruction of her golf cart, emotional trauma, and most absurd of all, attempted vehicular manslaughter by animal proxy. My lawyer nearly choked on his coffee when he read it. He told me not to worry, that the case had no merit, but to show up prepared and bring every shred of footage I had. I spent that entire weekend organizing files, backing up video, and printing maps with highlighted property lines. Meanwhile, Sheriff got a new salt lick and seemed blissfully unaware that he was about to become the most famous bull in the county. The day of court was something straight out of a sitcom. Karen showed up in a neck brace, sunglasses, and a dramatic black shawl, like she was attending her own funeral. Her lawyer was a young guy who looked barely out of college and was clearly uncomfortable representing her. I wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt and brought my cousin Nate along, both as a witness and moral support. When we sat down in the courtroom, Karen immediately began whispering loud enough for everyone to hear that I had probably paid off the judge and that the whole town was corrupt. I resisted the urge to laugh. When it was her turn to speak, Karen launched into a tearful monologue about how the bull had locked eyes with her and how she had feared for her life, claiming that I had released the animal as an act of deliberate vengeance for her use of what she still insisted was a shared trail. Her lawyer tried to sound convincing, but even he looked embarrassed. When it was my turn, I calmly explained the layout of my property, showed the court the signs warning about livestock and trespassing, and then played the security footage. The courtroom was dead silent as the video showed Karen parking, sunbathing, refusing to move, and finally bolting away from her cart after Sheriff emerged. The judge leaned forward, replayed a section twice, and then asked her bluntly, "Why were you parked in front of a working barn on private property in front of livestock?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and then said something about the angle of the sun and a medical condition that required warm light. The judge looked unimpressed. The verdict came swiftly. Case dismissed. Not only that, but the judge warned Karen that further attempts to harass or trespass on private agricultural land could result in criminal charges. She left in a huff, her brace mysteriously gone and her dramatic shawl stuffed under her arm like a defeated flag outside the courtroom. A few people who had sat in the gallery came over to shake my hand and laugh about the video. Sheriff, they said, had the timing of a movie star. Someone joked that he needed his own TikTok channel. By the time I got back to the farm, word had already spread. One of the ranch hands made a meme and sent it to our group chat. Sheriff standing next to the broken golf cart with the caption, "You parked where?" I knew Karen wouldn't take the loss quietly, but for the time being things were calm. No more carts, no more brunch parties, no more HOA flyers stuffed in my mailbox. Sheriff returned to his usual rotation of pasture and shade, and I installed a new barn gate with a coated lock just to be safe. Still, I had a feeling this wasn't over. People like Karen don't let go. They escalate, shift tactics, and try new angles, and I was right, because just when I thought things were finally back to normal, I got a knock on the door from a county zoning inspector. Apparently, there had been an anonymous tip about illegal barn modifications and unauthorized animal structures built too close to residential zones. As the inspector walked through the barn taking notes, I looked out across the pasture and saw Karen standing by the fence with a smile on her face and a phone in her hand. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just entitled, she was dangerous in the way only someone with too much time and not enough understanding can be. But what she didn't know, what she hadn't figured out yet, was that I still had plenty of moves left, and if she wanted to drag this battle out, she'd better be ready, because next time it wouldn't. The zoning inspector walked slowly through the barn, clipboard in hand, occasionally jotting down notes and glancing around with a faint expression of confusion. He didn't look like someone expecting to find trouble, more like someone trying to figure out why he was called there in the first place. I kept my answers brief and polite as he asked about the age of the barn, livestock capacity, ventilation setups, and even how we stored grain. It was obvious he was going through a checklist sent to him by someone who had never set foot on a working farm. Karen Had taken her loss in court personally, and now she was trying to hit me through bureaucracy, but unlike her I played by the rules, and every nail gate and animal shelter on this land was legal permitted and inspected regularly. I'd spent years making sure of it. The inspector finally closed his folder and looked around the barn. One last time. Sheriff was in his pen, chewing slowly and staring like he knew this was somehow about him. The inspector chuckled and said, "This is the bull that's got everyone in a twist." Nodded. "Well, he looks pretty calm to me," he said, "and everything checks out. Here, no violations, not even a minor one. I'll file the report today." I walked him out, and as we reached the end of the drive he paused and lowered his voice. "Just between us, I get calls like this sometimes, people using the system to settle grudges. You've got nothing to worry about, but I'd recommend putting up one of those digital trail cameras along your fence line. Might help to have proof in case someone starts making stuff up." I thanked him, and he drove off, leaving a cloud of dust behind, but I didn't miss the car idling 2 houses down, parked just far enough to look casual but positioned with a perfect view of my gate. Karen. It was time to stop reacting. I'd been one step behind Karen since the beginning, trying to stay calm and legal while she pushed every boundary she could find, but now I needed to make it clear that I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I had the legal right, the land, the community support, and a bull who was already a local legend. It was time to make Karen understand without a doubt that there were consequences for crossing fences. Figuratively and literally, I started by installing 2 new signs on the barn doors, large, professionally printed ones that read, "Private property, agricultural use, no trespassing, livestock present, enter at own risk." Below that I added a second layer, "Smile, you're on 24-hour surveillance." Next I took the inspector's advice and mounted 2 trail cams in hidden but strategic spots, one on the far eastern fence line where Karen often wandered in from the Hoya walking path, and another near the old oak tree where she once hid from Sheriff. Both were motion activated and streamed directly to my phone. The final touch was a new steel gate with a keypad lock, solar powered, with a rolling arm that blocked any sort of cart or vehicle from entering the barn's immediate zone. But that wasn't all. I decided to take things a step further. Sheriff had already become a bit of a local celebrity after the courtroom footage got shared on a local community group. I leaned into it. My cousin designed a logo, Sheriff, the bull with sunglasses, and the phrase "you parked where" printed underneath. We printed t-shirts, stickers, and mugs. I donated the first run's profits to the county fair's 4-H youth program. Within days, people from across town were coming by just to snap a photo with Sheriff from behind the fence. I even set up a safe viewing area next to the barn, complete with a laminated timeline of Sheriff's great HOA showdown. Karen hated it. She would drive by slowly in her SUV, glaring out the window at the families laughing and posing with Sheriff in the background. I knew she was boiling inside. Not only had she lost the court case, but she had now become the unspoken villain of a community folktale, and yet she still hadn't learned. One afternoon, while I was out back checking on the irrigation system, I heard a loud crash. I ran to the front of the barn to find Sheriff pacing near the new gate, and just beyond it Karen's new golf cart. She'd replaced the wrecked one with a shinier, more obnoxious model, was wedged halfway up the fence. She tried to drive around the gate using a side trail and hadn't realized I'd added a narrow cattle grate there. Her front tires had dropped into the slots, and the cart was stuck at a diagonal, front wheels spinning, back end dragging. Karen was nowhere in sight. She'd apparently fled the scene, probably realizing that between the surveillance and the obvious trespassing, there was no excuse this time. I walked up slowly, took a few photos, then called the Sheriff's Department. Deputy Riley, a young guy who'd grown up locally and knew both me and the property, showed up in 20 minutes. He took one look at the cart, whistled, and said, "You've really got a talent for pulling this woman out of hiding." We filed a report, and I had the cart towed, not by a local shop, but by a company 3 towns over that specialized in livestock-related vehicle retrieval. It was petty maybe, but I was done being nice. I paid the fee myself and told the company to hold the cart until the owner showed up in person with ID and an explanation. Karen never showed. A week later, she tried to claim it had been stolen, but the surveillance footage told a different story. That claim disappeared fast. Then came the icing on the cake. The HOA board called a special meeting, one that I wasn't supposed to know about, but a neighbor who couldn't stand Karen sent me a copy of the agenda. Item number 3, review of member conduct and unauthorized use of non-HOA property. Apparently Curtis and Angela had seen the court video. They had received complaints about Karen misrepresenting HOA policy and endangering community reputation. She'd used HOA letterhead to back her claims and printed signs with fake authorization. Not only was she out of line, she might have violated several community bylaws. A few nights later, I sat on my porch as the sun dipped low, sipping coffee and watching the clouds roll over the barn. Sheriff was lying in his favorite patch of dirt, eyes half-closed, tail twitching occasionally. The air was quiet for once. No golf carts rumbled through the pasture. No signs mysteriously appeared. No brunch tables. Just peace. But that peace wasn't the result of me yelling louder or stooping to Karen's level. It was the result of patience, planning, and using every ounce of my right to protect my home. Karen had pushed, poked, and lied her way into a storm, and now she was reaping the consequences. The HOA had started distancing themselves. Neighbors were talking, and the legend of Sheriff was growing by the week. Karen wasn't gone. I could feel it. People like her rarely retreat completely. They lurk, they simmer, and they wait for another opportunity to feel powerful. But next time, if she tried something, anything, I'd be more than ready, because now the town was watching. Now the fence was fortified, and now the bull had a fan base. And somewhere deep in Karen's mind, she had to be wondering, if that's how I reacted to a golf cart, what would I do if she pushed even harder? The question alone might be enough to keep her in check, but if not, well, Sheriff was always ready for a walk. The weather shifted the following week, and with it came a strange stillness that settled over the property. Karen hadn't been seen in days, and the usual whispers from HOA residents who used to walk the edge of my land fell silent. The paths stayed clear. The new gate stayed untouched, and Sheriff seemed particularly relaxed, spending most of his afternoons sunbathing and flicking flies off his back like a creature who had conquered his world for a few days. It really felt like the dust had settled, but deep down I knew people like Karen didn't simply disappear. They waited, and sure enough, she was just waiting for her final move. It started with a letter, an official-looking envelope marked urgent. HOA property review. At first glance, it appeared to be another weak attempt at claiming jurisdiction over my land, but this time it was different. Karen had managed to submit a motion at the county zoning board to have my barn and the surrounding pasture reviewed for potential rezoning as residential overflow land. I laughed at first. It was ridiculous. My family had owned this farm for generations, and the land was protected under agricultural zoning, but the trick wasn't in the motion itself. It was in the red tape. If the review went forward, it would trigger mandatory inspections, temporary restrictions on land use, and even possible fines if anything, no matter how minor, didn't meet updated residential adjacency codes. It was a classic bureaucratic ambush. Karen didn't need to win, she just needed to make life difficult enough to wear me down. I didn't waste time. I drove straight to the county office and met with a clerk I knew named Lisa. She walked me through the motion and confirmed what I suspected. Karen had misused a loophole in the zoning complaint process by listing herself as a concerned bordering resident and inflating the number of supporting signatures. Most of them were from HOA members who either didn't understand what they were signing or were simply tired of Karen's persistence and gave in. Just to shut her up, Lisa sighed as she flipped through the forms. She's turned this into a personal crusade, she said, but the good news is this is all still preliminary. You've got time to respond. I spent the next 2 days gathering everything I could: original zoning certificate, historical land surveys, photographs of my grandfather building the barn with his own hands, testimonials from neighbors who supported the farm, including some who had lived in the area longer than the HOA itself had existed. Sheriff, ever the unbothered centerpiece of this saga, continued his routine of napping near the gate and occasionally posing for the handful of fans who still came by to see the famous bull. Meanwhile, I put in a call to a local agricultural rights attorney, a woman named Carla, who came highly recommended by the county extension office. She met me on site the next morning, and after walking the perimeter and reviewing Karen's motion, shook her head in disbelief. She's reaching hard, Carla said, but I've seen cases like this drag out if they're not shut down early. Lucky for you, you've got history proof and, believe it or not, a public image advantage. I knew what she meant. The viral video of Sheriff and the destroyed golf cart had reached far more people than I ever intended. A local news outlet had even reached out for a lighthearted feature on Sheriff as the bull who fought the HOA I had declined. The interview at the time not wanting to stoke the flames, but now I was reconsidering if Karen wanted to make this a public war, I would give her one. With facts, legality, and yes, a little theatrical flair. The hearing for the zoning review was scheduled for the following Friday at the county building. I arrived with Carla 3 binders of documentation and a flash drive containing digital evidence maps and time-stamped video. The room was modest, filled with board members, a few curious residents, and unsurprisingly Karen dressed in business attire that looked like she had borrowed it from a courtroom drama set. She spoke first, standing before the board with her voice calm and syrupy, explaining how she deeply respected local agriculture but had serious concerns about safety, property value depreciation, and the unsightly behavior of certain livestock. It was clear she had practiced. She even passed out printed copies of her motion, complete with poorly photoshopped images of Sheriff appearing more aggressive than he actually was. One photo even included a misleading caption beneath a screenshot from the day of the cart incident suggesting I had weaponized an animal to intimidate community members. When it was my turn, Carla stood first and addressed the board with the precision of someone who had handled 100 of these cases. She laid out our argument, explained the falsehoods in Karen's motion, and backed it all up with hard evidence. Then I was called to speak, and I did something unexpected. I skipped the prepared statement. Instead, I spoke from the heart, telling the story of the land, the barn, the years of work poured into it, and how my grandfather used to say, if you treat the land right, it'll take care of you even when people won't. I showed the photos. I played the video of Karen sunbathing in front of the barn, the same one from the court case. The board members watched in silence. Then I played a short clip of Sheriff just days ago being brushed by one of the local 4-H kids, calm and cooperative. I pointed out that the barn wasn't just a building, it was part of a teaching space, a livelihood, and a legacy. Carla closed the presentation by reading off a list of agricultural exemptions, historic property protections, and local support letters from surrounding homeowners, several of whom were now seated behind me. The board deliberated for just 15 minutes before ruling unanimously to dismiss Karen's motion. Not only that, but they added a formal recommendation to update the zoning process to prevent malicious filings in the future. As the room began to clear, Karen stood frozen, mouth slightly open, unable to process how her last shot had not only missed but backfired completely. Outside, the air was brisk and the wind carried the scent of the pasture across the lot. Carla patted me on the back, grinning. That's about as thorough a shutdown as I've ever seen, she said. I thanked her and turned to see a group of kids from the local FFA chapter waiting with their parents near the sidewalk. They asked if they could take a picture with Sheriff the next weekend. I smiled and said they were welcome anytime. When I got back home that evening, I walked out to the barn with a cold lemonade in hand. Sheriff was already there, standing quietly under the old pecan tree, watching the sunset with that eternal patience he always seemed to have. I leaned against the fence and gave him a nod. He didn't react, but I like to think he understood. That weekend, I hosted a small event. We called it Barn Freedom Day. It wasn't huge, just neighbors, a few families, some local ranchers, and of course the kids. Sheriff wore a ribbon around his neck and munched happily while everyone laughed toward the barn and shared stories. One woman brought a cake that read "Justice with Hooves." We even set up a small donation booth for the local animal shelter, and by sunset, the collection box was full. Cred to face what's behind the gate.